Hello, and we are live. Welcome to Useful Idiots Monday Morning, where we go over the Sunday morning news shows that we watch so that you don't have to. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Aaron Maté, sitting in for Matt Taibbi.
For a year. So,
For a year, yeah.
Yeah.
Jeez, it's a long time.
Get y'all useful. What did that just say? There was a funny comment. Get y'all useful asses up in here and let's get it poppin'. All right. Well, that was to us, but I'm going to apply that to people on the stream, and I'm going to say, like the stream. Get your asses poppin', like the stream. All right. All right. That's all I'm going to say about liking the stream, but it's a good thing to do. Effortless. You just click, you just do a little click, and then you've liked it, and you help out the algorithm, and you fight back against YouTube.
And your charitable work is done for the entire year.
Yeah, basically that's it.
Yeah,
that's it. Done. Yeah, that's it. Isn't that a great feeling? That's a great feeling. Someone just wrote in the comments, always start the show with Stelter, which I think maybe is what we should do. Because, Aaron, I don't mean to tear down that fourth wall, but there's a clip that I found that I didn't have time to share with you, but I think you're going to like it.
Is Brian Stelter in it?
Yes.
I love it already.
All right. So Wilson, let's start off with this Brian Stelter clip. Very useful. Really good to start the show with it.
Barbara King wants to arm this 8th grade class.
All right, so today's topic is misinformation.
With the tools they will need in a world of information saturation.
We're going to learn to identify the various types of misinformation.
And there is a lot to learn.
They're called satire, false context, imposter content, manipulated content, and fabricated content.
Just imagine trying to make sense of all of this as a teenager.
Now we go to imposter content. What does imposter mean?
Like someone trying to be someone else.
Someone trying to be someone else, right? You hear that word, what's an imposter? So an imposter content uses either a well-known name, a brand, or a logo to fool people into believing that it's authentic.
As the web becomes even more of a Wild West every day, the students here at PS 207 in Queens, New York, know that they need these lessons.
A lot of students have social media, and if they're looking at stuff that is like wrong and just telling everyone that it's right, and they're just giving everyone false information.
King began teaching media literacy 7 years ago. Why the initial impulse to teach about this?
I feel it's a skill that my students
Katie, you're muted.
Yeah, Katie, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I was going to say that's the second time her mask has fallen below her nose. And that in itself is a form of misinformation.
That is misinformation.
Right? Because you need to be telling your students that they have to wear their masks, well-fitting masks.
That's right.
If the schnoz is sticking out, how well-fitting can that really be? All right, that's it. That's all I want to add. Thank you. Oh,
students really need. There's too much misinformation around us in the world, and I want to give them some tools to make sense of what they're seeing.
She uses curriculum from the News Literacy Project, a nonpartisan education nonprofit. Founder Alan Miller says these lessons are now used by more than 37,000 educators.
What do I mean by I want you to critically think about what you're seeing on the internet?
The goal is to equip future generations of savvy news consumers.
So in the picture, it looks like a car is like on a highway and there's like a shark in the water.
Okay, I have to admit something. I've fallen for that before. Once. Just once. Did you ever see that?
No, I've never seen this.
All right, it's really embarrassing.
And so what are we looking at? We're looking at what type of a social media? What kind of account is that?
Twitter.
It's an infamous fake, one that gets reshared every time there's a hurricane. And these students are sharing tips so they don't get fooled.
On Google, there's this little picture of a camera, and you can add the image in there, and it will reverse search it.
So ultimately,
Did you know about
news
that,
literacy
by the way?
is about something big.
Do you know about that trick? It's really good. I think you may have to have a. I'm just sharing this tip, not to be a snitch. It's a useful thing in general. But you do a reverse search. I think it's with Google Chrome, and you right click, and it's like search Google for this image. It's very helpful.
Okay.
It's about basic critical thinking skills.
The nose is sticking out again.
How do you try to connect those dots?
Well, to me, this is a real world problem. It's very easy to bring that in when they start realizing I can utilize these skills in anything that I do.
After the class, students told me the lessons hit close to home. Do any of you feel like you try to correct friends or family now based on what you've learned? Mm-hmm. Really?
Yeah. I mean, like when COVID first started, like my family thought that, wow, this is a hoax, but then I'm like, this is real. Like people are really dying, getting sick from it. I really just wanted to believe that it was fake, because I didn't want that to really happen to me, but it was real and it just changed everyone's lives, honestly.
But that gets to the motivations of you want to believe something, but you got to face reality head on.
Other fake articles, maybe you want to believe it, but it's not true and you have to research if it's really true or not.
More traffic into this fake site.
They also said their peers would benefit from this class. Do you all feel like every student needs to be learning news literacy?
Yeah.
This is like Brian Stelter's. He's loving life right now. This is like his dream, like generations of young news consumers being trained against misinformation that, of course, excludes his entire branded media from that category, even though
network.
He does so much of it. But, I salute the teacher. I think it's there's nothing wrong with teaching kids critical thinking skills, and it's a good idea. And, there is it's important to help them think about critically of the media, as long as that's actually what is being taught here. And Brian Stelter would not be promoting something that actually taught across the board critical thinking, because that would entail, criticizing and critiquing and dismissing so much of what his network puts out every single day.
What would be a good thing to show if they taught something like conflict of interest? They could be like, now, tell me something. Should one Cuomo be interviewing another Cuomo when said Cuomo is under investigation?
Yeah.
So she left that out. That's not misinformation. That's just bias.
Yeah.
But maybe we can work on a useful idiots curriculum.
Well, and Brian would be the guest speaker. He'd be like, yeah, it's actually fine because they made it clear that they're brothers on the air. Because remember back when CNN was defending its decision to have Andrew Cuomo interview his brother, Brian Stelter was like, CNN's taking care of it. CNN's on top of it.
Yeah, they revealed it. And also, this was my favorite excuse. I don't remember if it was from Brian or if it was from someone else at CNN, but it was basically, well, now they've stopped. Now he's no longer covering it. Excuse me. But that's when he was already called out on it. And they were like, and also he stopped covering it when the shit was hitting the fan. So it was a little too late. What were they going to do? But he was covering it before, and he was helping do good PR for him before. Anyway, so thank you for blessing me. I have allergies in the morning. If you watch my show later on, the Katie Halper show, you'll see that I don't sneeze throughout, just so people don't think I'm covering up some health scandal. Should we go to the next one?
Let's do it.
The diplomacy, the consistent calls for meetings right now that the Russians are doing. Do you think they're genuine about diplomacy, or do you think they're just essentially playing out the calendar here because he's not going to upset Xi in the Olympics, and essentially we're making it look more legitimate by negotiating? Are you worried that he's playing us a little bit?
Look, it is certainly possible that the diplomacy that Russia is engaged in is simply going through the motions, and it won't affect their ultimate decision about whether to invade or in some other way intervene or not in Ukraine. But we have a responsibility to see the diplomacy through for as far and as long as we can go, because it's the more responsible way to bring this to closure. But Chuck, we are not sitting still. Even as we're engaged in diplomacy, even as we're engaged in dialogue, we are building up defense, we're building up deterrence. We've now provided to Ukraine more.
All right, let me know, Aaron, if you want to pause anything, because I see that you're disabled from pausing.
Well, it's if you missed the Sunday shows yesterday, we can sum up what you missed when it comes to Ukraine, Russia, and U.S. very quickly. You know how kids, the saying is, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" Well, basically. All the Sunday shows are yesterday when it comes to Russia. Are we sanctioning Russia yet?
Right.
Are we sanctioning Russia yet? Are we sanctioning Russia? That's all anybody asks Blinken. It's this thirst for confrontation and sadism. And there's this new article today in the Washington Post talking about all these different sanctions measures that the U.S. policymakers are dreaming up, because they all just like they get off on sanctioning targeted governments that are in the U.S.'s way, and now they're talking about sanctioning the parts that go into consumer goods, like electronics. And they're like, salivating over this, and there's a lot of excitement about that right now. So that's going to be
sanction
the new
happy.
thing. Yeah, they love to sanction anybody, and the hostess cannot contain their enthusiasm.
I know
for
it's
sanctions.
really
Yeah.
ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see. There's a pattern that Aaron is talking about that we'll see right now.
Security assistance this year than in any previous year. We have rallied allies and partners around the world. We are preparing massive consequences for Russia if it invades Ukraine again. So you have to do both at the same time. You build up your defense, you build up your deterrence on the one hand, you engage in diplomacy and dialogue on the other. That's the way that I think it makes the most sense to carry this forward. Ultimately, we've given Russia two paths. It has to.
Yeah, right. Look, this whole thing is so stupid, and it's starting, like, the cracks are starting to emerge. This weekend, I don't know if you saw this, Katie, but the head of the German Navy had to resign because he blurted out the truth. He said that basically he doesn't think that. Well, he spoke in that's a good impersonation, but he spoke in English.
Oh, okay.
English, so there was no German, unfortunately. But if he had spoken in German, I'm sure he was sounding exactly like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, basically, he said that he doesn't think Russia is actually going to invade. He also said that Crimea is never going back to Ukraine because of its importance to Russia's security interests. And he said that basically what Russia really wants, Putin really wants, is just respect. That's what this is about. He just wants respect. And he said he even deserves respect. And for saying such heresy, he was forced to resign. The head of Germany's Navy. Wow. And now there's a stunt going on where, Blinken has ordered the withdrawal of U.S. personnel from the embassy in Ukraine because of the imminent danger of a Russian invasion. But no one else is going along, including the EU. And the EU's like, yeah, we're not doing that because we don't need to dramatize the situation. So basically, he's calling Blinken a drama queen, essentially, and saying that they're pulling this stunt. And so people aren't going along with it right now. So it's just a funny time. But wow. Blinken and the Sunday news shows have to do the job of keeping up the appearance that this is some sort of major crisis and a Russian invasion is imminent, and they're doing all they can to avoid it. All, by the way, and this just speaks to, like, on top of just how distorted the actual background to this whole Ukraine crisis is, ignoring, the key U.S. role in fomenting it, going back to the end of the Cold War when the U.S. promised not to expand NATO, but they've broken that promise ever since, and going on to the coup in Ukraine 2014, all that background we've talked about before. There's just the fact that, like, the premise of this U.S. in a standoff and trying to find diplomacy to avoid a war, it's made all the more ridiculous by the fact that there is a war right now actually going on. Mm-hmm. And it's a war that the U.S. could end today if it wanted to. And that is it's not even really a war so much. It's just an all-right. It's a siege. And that's the Saudi siege attack on Yemen. Yeah. And just a few days ago, there was another massacre by Saudi Arabia, killed, 70 civilians, including children playing soccer near Hodeidah. And that's made with U.S. weapons. And these are weapons that the Biden administration is choosing to supply, even after Biden campaigned on ending the war in Yemen. Remember that?
Yeah, he just rebranded it.
He just rebranded and said, we're only giving weapons now for defensive purposes. Right.
How do you defend yourself when you're the invading power and siege enactor?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a war. And I didn't see any mention at all of Yemen on the Sunday news show this week, which just speaks to their real purpose.
Right. If you really care about war.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, they're happy. They don't need to talk about it, Aaron, because it's already happening.
Right.
So they don't need to egg it on. Although they could egg it on to make sure if they were doing their jobs, they'd be giving thanks to the war.
Well, exactly.
Positive reinforcement.
Yeah, and it's just so sadistic and barbaric that they just can't. They're obviously too ashamed to even mention it, so they have to just pretend it doesn't exist. But it's ongoing, And Blinken and Biden could stop it today if they wanted to.
Right. And it's the, children are just dying of hunger. It has the worst cholera outbreak, and it has, extreme starvation that's happening right now as we speak. So
the diplomacy, the consistent calls for meetings right now that the Russians are doing.
Oh,
well, that's Chuck. That's Chuck saying how upset he is with the consistent calls for meetings and diplomacy by Russia. And he's worried that that's all just a ruse because, of course, Chuck Todd hates even the idea of the U.S. and a targeted country that it demonizes, even them being in the same room together, sitting down. They hate the thought because they feel as if even the idea of shaking someone's hand and talking to them grants the other side a legitimacy. Yeah, it's appeasement, this equivalence that we don't have.
Yeah.
How can we even talk to these people? They're offended by the sight of diplomacy.
Capitulation.
Yes.
Letting the bad guys win.
Yep.
Yeah, it's really ridiculous.
Ukrainian President Zelensky.
Oops. Were we done with that clip? Or
yeah, that was the end. Yeah.
But luckily we get Blinken on every single channel.
Yeah, and being asked the exact same questions, are we doing too much diplomacy? Is it a mistake to look in a Russian's eyes and acknowledge their existence?
Yeah. All right. Even though war is supposed to be fought after all diplomacy is exhausted, but whatever. All right, let's go to the clip.
Calling for the U.S. And others, Europeans, to put sanctions in place now, to do it proactively, not reactively.
Are we there yet?
He said, quote, today our partners are saying that war may start tomorrow if there is a powerful escalation on the Russian side, and then there will be powerful sanctions applied. The question is, why are you not introducing sanctions now rather than wait until after the escalation? What's your answer to that?
First of all, Donna, as I said, we are not waiting. We are doing a lot right now. And as I mentioned, besides the United States taking the lead and bringing countries throughout Europe and even beyond together in putting together massive consequences for Russia if it takes renewed aggressive action in Ukraine, as I mentioned, we're providing, and last year alone, provided more military assistance to Ukraine than at any year in the past. We have been going against those inside Ukraine, trying to destabilize the government. So we're taking concrete action.
But you're not imposing the sanctions.
So when it comes to sanctions,
are we there yet?
We should drink every time. Is to deter Russian aggression. And so if they're triggered now, you lose the deterrent effect. All of the things that we're doing, including building up in a united way with Europe, massive consequences for Russia, is designed to factor into President Putin's calculus and to deter and dissuade them from taking aggressive action, even as we pursue diplomacy at the same time.
Do you see any scenario in which more U.S. service members become involved here?
One of the things that we've been very clear about,
send troops too?
Besides the massive economic, financial...
Yeah, they're adding that to the ask, right?
Yeah.
That's literally, are we there yet? Are boots on the ground there yet?
Can we cut off milk formula for babies? And can we also send some more troops? Can we send some more troops? Please.
Consequences that would befall Russia if it further commits aggression against Ukraine is the ongoing continued buildup of defense capacity in Ukraine and equally continuing to build up NATO's defensive capacities, including on the so-called eastern flank, the countries near Russia. And the alliance is looking at...
Wilson?
There's a new article in Foreign Policy by two analysts with the RAND Corporation, which is basically a Pentagon think tank. And they point out, they're not, peaceniks, but they point out that basically, no matter how many weapons the U.S. pours into Ukraine within a couple of weeks, it's not going to matter. Russia exists on that border. And no matter how many weapons the U.S. pours in, Russia has just an overwhelming military advantage because they're all there. Their tanks, their planes, they're all there. It's not even close. So they point out that it's just the idea that pouring in more weapons is going to deter Russia. It's completely futile. And so what this is, it's not about even if you forget all the political background, who caused the crisis, even just from a military point of view, there's nothing the U.S. can do to deter Russia. So what all these weapons deliveries are, and they're bragging about how many weapons they're sending to Ukraine, a country that is dealing with major economic issues, high levels of poverty, the armed forces,
Nazis.
the neo-Nazis and the armed forces, no matter how many weapons you say, it's not going to make a difference. So all this is just for show. It's basically for chicken hawks to feel tough, to feel as if they're doing something, and to enrich weapons dealers, Lockheed Martin and everybody else who provides lethal aid. That's what it's called. That's what it's all about.
Lethal aid. Isn't that an insane thing to talk about? I can't believe it. Anyway, all right, let's keep going.
Very practical and important measures that it would take in the event of further Russian aggression.
So you mentioned different.
He does. A lot of people point this out. He does ironically blink a lot less than most people.
Because he's shook. Because he's shook. He's scared.
He's shook. Yeah.
Of aggression. Let's talk about one specific potential. Russian-backed forces currently occupy part, but not all, of the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine. Would seizing or recognizing the entire Donbas region qualify as an invasion and result in the crippling sanctions that you're threatening?
Pause it again.
A single additional Russian force.
This article again in Foreign Policy, I'll tweet it out after this interview, after we do this. It also points out that the majority of people who Ukraine's been fighting, the Ukraine government's been fighting in the Donbass, are Ukrainian. Now, they're backed by Russia. They get arms from Russia, training from Russia, and there are some Russian officers there supporting them. But the vast majority of the forces are Ukrainian, and that's what the U.S. does not want to address. The fact is, there's a part of Ukraine that does not recognize the government that the U.S. installed in 2014, and they've been fighting a rebellion ever since. And the U.S. media wants to pretend as these are all just Russians invading the country and fighting some kind of separatist war. No, it's actually an indigenous group inside Ukraine that didn't want to have their government overthrown because they supported that government.
Right.
And the U.S. was heavily involved in the coup back in 2014.
Right. Which they never cover. They never cover it that
Never.
way.
No.
It's always Ukrainian versus Russian.
Yeah.
Goes into Ukraine in an aggressive way. As I said, that would trigger a swift, a severe, and a united response from us and from Europe. And again, there are other things that Russia could do that fall short of actually sending additional forces into Ukraine. And again, across the board, we're prepared with Europe for a swift and calibrated and very united response. We're looking at every single scenario, preparing for every single one.
President Biden said an invasion would be the most consequential thing that's happened in the world in terms of war and peace since World War II. Why?
He's exactly right. And again,
wait, I thought we already had the third Pearl Harbor.
Oh, which was January 6th and or Russiagate.
And Russiagate, yeah. But this is even bigger. Wow. This is going to be the fourth Pearl Harbor.
Do you want to know what I think that question is really about? Because Biden screwed up, because Biden screwed up so badly, and he blurted out, as he does sometimes, in an amazing way, like the truth. And he said this week that, if Russia did a minor incursion, then basically the U.S. wouldn't do anything. And he also said that Putin has to do something. He actually showed some empathy towards Putin's position because of,
poor guy.
Because of the position the U.S. has put Russia in, with refusing to, negotiate a commitment that would keep Ukraine out of NATO. So Biden was basically saying Putin has to do something. So Biden had to go on this big apology tour and apology, and Blinken bore the brunt of that. So where I think this question comes from, and this is I don't know, this is purely speculation, is they needed to give Blinken an opportunity to say that Biden got something right, to be to show that the commander in chief is still saying accurate things. So
it's still with it.
They put out a very bland statement, this would be one of the most dangerous things in Europe. Yeah, which is, sure, which is true. So that's why Blinken's he's exactly right. Our president is exactly right. They were doing that for Joe.
Right. It's all for Joe. Yeah. Does Joe sometimes confuse his diary with public speaking events? Why would he have said that before?
Well, because sometimes Joe says the truth,
Yeah.
Sometimes he blurts it out.
Yeah.
I talked about before where he, during the dirty war in Syria, he was speaking to an audience at Harvard University. He was vice president, and he all this, the line we were getting was the U.S. was arming moderate rebels, and these are all. And Biden blurted out, he's like, there are no moderate rebels in Syria. They're all of them are Al Qaeda, and that's who our allies have been arming to have a sectarian war.
Yeah. Thanks,
and
Joe.
it was great, and it was wonderful. He had to apologize to Turkey and Saudi Arabia, not because he got anything wrong, but because he said the truth.
Right.
And that was very
It
inconvenient.
was
So
a PR
sometimes
damage control.
So sometimes Biden says to him, just he can't control himself, and he spits out the truth.
Yeah.
I love it.
You love to see it.
This underscores why this is so important, not just for Ukraine, not just for Russia, not just for Europe and the United States, but for the world. Because what's at stake here, Anna, are some very basic principles of international relations that have been established since 2 world wars and a Cold War that have kept peace and security. Principles like one nation can't go in by force and change the borders of another. Principles like one nation can't dictate to another.
Someone should be taking notes here.
Yeah, these are principles the U.S. is defending, that you can't change another country's border by force. Right. That's why the U.S. every single day, protects Israel from any type of international scrutiny. Right. Because when Israel stole all the land that it's now based on, including the West Bank, Gaza, the Golan Heights of Syria, that somehow, when it stole all that land from other nations, that was somehow Israel just reclaiming its own territory. So
doesn't Israel have the right to defend itself, Aaron? Doesn't Israel have the right to exist?
And then the funnier, it's even funnier when he says we're defending the principles where other countries can't dictate to others what their policies should be. That's like, talk to any country in the world and they'll give you an example, a long list of the U.S. trying to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
Whether it's in Venezuela right now, the U.S. is trying to install a new leader. They've been doing that for 3 years now, I guess. And that's Biden continuing the Trump coup policy. Talk to Europe, where right now the U.S. is trying to bully people not into not letting the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline flow between Russia and Germany. And talk to any country in the world. Haiti, where the U.S. tried to undermine efforts to raise the minimum wage, and we know all that via WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Clinton, and thank you to Julian Assange, by the way, who just narrowly won his appeal. Right, he can now appeal to the Supreme Court in the UK on very narrow grounds. This just came down today. So,
guys.
Some good news. But the idea that Blinken's defending principles, the only principle they're defending here is that the U.S. runs the world.
Yeah, U.S. hegemony.
And no one can try to impose demands like keeping Ukraine out of a hostile U.S.-run military alliance.
Yeah.
Okay. It's policies, it's choices, including with whom it will associate. A principle like the fact that you cannot now, in the 21st century, purport to exert a sphere of influence to try to subjugate your neighbors to your will. If we allow those things to go forward and stand with impunity, then that opens a Pandora's box that
just
countries
this week,
well beyond Europe.
Just this week, Biden called Latin America the U.S.'s front yard. He said it's not our backyard, it's our front yard.
It's a step up. It's a step up, yeah.
But he was basically reaffirming U.S. support for the Monroe Doctrine, which says that we get to tell Latin American countries what to do because, in Biden's words, that's our front yard.
As Mexican President Benito Juarez once said, "Poor Mexico, so far from God, so close to the United States."
That's good.
We'll see and maybe decide to act on.
Let's start with that new British intelligence that the Russian government is planning to install a pro-Russian leader in Ukraine. Does the U.S. agree with that view?
Well, Dana, I can't comment on specific pieces of intelligence, but we've been warning about just this kind of tactic for weeks.
Pause it for a second.
We've spoken to that publicly.
So if you missed this story, the British government, in what the New York Times called a muscular move, which is so funny. Anytime like the U.S. and its allies do something aggressive and cowardly by coming up with some pro-war propaganda towards a targeted country, the New York Times calls it muscular. The Britain came out with this claim that they have intelligence that Russia is planning to install a pro-Russian leader in Ukraine, which is ironic for many reasons, because basically what they're accusing Russia of doing is exactly what the U.S. did in 2014 when the U.S. installed pro-Western leaders by sabotaging a peace agreement that would have resolved the Maidan coup protests and sort of ended the standoff there. The U.S. sabotaged that and installed a pro-Western leader. And there's even a leaked phone call of Victoria Nuland, who was then a top U.S. official under Obama is now back under Biden, and they're choosing the next Ukrainian leader.
Right, we played that a couple
Nuland
episodes
says,
ago, yeah.
Yats is the guy, and Yatsenyuk became the prime minister just a few weeks later because Nuland decided that he was the guy.
Yeah.
So U.S.
Let's play Yahtzee.
Exactly. So the U.S. is accusing Russia of what they actually did in Ukraine, and of course they're doing it in the most funny way because like Britain put out some names of some people who Russia is supposedly considering installing, and one of them is on the Russian sanctions
And
list.
just last week, we sanctioned 4 agents of Russia. Ukraine.
Yep. Sorry, keep going.
So one of the supposed candidates who Russia is trying to install is on the Russian sanctions list. Like Russia is sanctioning this guy. So Russia's going to take him off the sanctions list and then install him as the leader of Ukraine. It's so ridiculous. And of course, at the bottom of the articles about it, like in the New York Times, they acknowledge the inconvenient caveat that there is no evidence at all for it, and Britain won't tell us. But this time we're supposed to believe it.
Right.
Just like we were supposed to believe it when the British told us that Saddam Hussein was 45 minutes away from using weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, British intelligence, good precedent.
Yeah.
By the way, correction, it was Porfirio Diaz, not Juarez, who said that about Mexico. My bad. Okay.
Ukrainians in Ukraine seeking to destabilize the government. So this is very much part of the Russian toolkit. It runs the gamut from a large conventional incursion or invasion of Ukraine to these kind of destabilizing activities in an attempt to topple the government. And it's important that people be on notice about that possibility.
Does this intelligence
if you're looking for a definition of what the Russian toolkit is, it means everything.
Right.
It means everything on God's green earth. It's like anything you can possibly accuse Russia of doing. It's in the Russian toolkit. It's in the classic.
So Russian.
It's in the classic Russian playbook. Everything is the classic Russian playbook.
RTK, Russian toolkit.
Mm-hmm.
More likely, in your view, that Putin is going to invade?
I don't think it speaks to whether it's more or less likely. I think it speaks to the fact that, as always, Russia develops lots of different options for doing things, including in Ukraine, and this is one of them. And it's something that people have to be aware of. Similarly, we've warned about the possibility of so-called false flag operations. That is, Russia manufacturing a provocation and then justifying anything it does in terms of responding to this manufactured provocation. There's been a lot of focus, rightly, on the fact that Russia has concentrated so many forces on Ukraine's border, and with the history of 2014 in our minds and Russia's invasion of Ukraine then, we're rightly focused on that. But it's also important that people understand there are a range of things that Russia could do, could be prepared to do, and we're prepared to deal with all of them.
I want to get to those other.
So far, the only false flag that we've seen is the U.S. stunt that they are pulling, as I talked about, when they're pulling out their diplomats from Ukraine, claiming that they're in danger of an imminent Russian invasion, and no one else is going along with it. That so far is the only false flag that's actually happened inside of Ukraine. Is this U.S. stunt? And the head of the EU even said we don't want to dramatize the situation. So it's but that's what they're trying to do, and that's what, of course, the Sunday shows are there to help promote.
Some false flag projection.
Yeah.
Options that Russia has in a moment. But broadly, you mentioned the troops. It's 127,000 Russian troops now near the border. How much power, in all honesty, does the U.S. really have to stop Russia?
We've given Russia two paths. There's a path of diplomacy and dialogue, one that I engaged in with Foreign Minister Lavrov just last week in Geneva. But there's also a path of its renewed aggression and massive consequences that we have been building now for many weeks. And it's not just us that's saying it. The G7, the world's leading democratic economies, have been clear about that. The European Union's been clear about that. NATO's been clear about that. And as we're doing that, we provided more defensive assistance, military assistance to Ukraine last year than at any time in the past. I just authorized myself the provision of American origin military equipment that's with third countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, to get to Ukraine. And we are in intense, regular, constant communication, consultation with allies and partners to make it very clear that these massive consequences will follow. So basically, at this point, Donna, the choice is Vladimir Putin's. And the paths are clear. Diplomacy, dialogue, seeing if we can build collective security in a way that is good for everyone is clearly the preferable path, but we're prepared either way.
So
congrats. So listen, congrats, first of all, to Lockheed Martin, to Raytheon, and all the other beneficiaries of really the only beneficiaries of this policy of sending more weapons to Ukraine, to neo-Nazis in Ukraine. They're having a great week. Let's congratulate them, because more lethal aid to Ukraine means more profits for weapons manufacturers.
Right.
But as we talked about before, even putting aside like who's right and who's wrong, militarily, it's completely futile, because Russia can win no matter what, because they just have military dominance, because they're located there. Where the U.S. is not, like, Ukraine is not on U.S. borders; it's on Russia's borders, and so Russia just has the overwhelming advantage. And note how, like, the question from Dana Bash, and this is always the case, it's never like what can the U.S. do diplomatically to resolve the crisis? Can the U.S. take Russian proposals seriously? Russia's published these 2 long treaties, or not long, but they're detailed treaties, proposed treaties of what can be done to resolve this crisis, and they include a provision to keep Ukraine out of NATO. No one ever thinks about going through these treaties and reading the text and saying, well, what about this? Is this reasonable? Right. Can you do this? That's not an option, because in the eyes of these people, diplomacy is not an option. And diplomacy, as you said, Kate, before, for them, it's capitulation. It's only, everything is in the question of, can we project enough force and bullying to sufficiently intimidate our foes? That's the only question that's really that can be posed by them.
Yeah. Should we go to the next clip, or is there more on this one?
I mean, this is, I think we got it. It's just more of the same. You know, it's just more of the same. It's just all warmongering.
Right.
And by the way, it's funny, on the issue of the weapons, what helped trigger Trump's impeachment back in 2019 is when Trump briefly paused those weapon sales to Ukraine. Because remember, the reason he was Sending Javelin missiles to Ukraine is because Obama had refused to send them, because Obama didn't want to further inflame the proxy war that he started in Ukraine. And he also didn't want to arm neo-Nazis in Ukraine.
Yeah. Right.
So Obama never sold those weapons. Trump came into office, and everyone is calling him a Russian puppet. A Russian puppet. You're a Russian puppet. So whatever, he doesn't care. So he caved immediately, and he sent those weapons to Ukraine. Then he briefly paused them. And the allegation was that he was doing that to pressure Ukraine to launch an investigation of Joe Biden. Now, there was evidence that he was trying to pressure Ukraine to launch an investigation of Biden, but there was no evidence that was tied at all to his decision to pause these weapon sales, and actually plenty of evidence to the contrary, as I wrote about at the time. But anyway, what triggered this freak out in Washington, and Adam Schiff saying that, oh my God, Russia's going to invade us now because we paused these weapon sales to Ukraine that Obama always refused to sell, was that military contractors started complaining. They noticed that there was this freeze on these weapons deliveries to Ukraine, and they started asking questions, being like, what's up? And this came out during the impeachment trial, the impeachment hearings, where some Pentagon officials were saying that our partners in the defense industry called us and they were complaining, and that's what triggered some alarm internally. And that's what so much of U.S. policy about Ukraine is about. It's just keeping weapons contractors happy.
And neo-Nazis.
And neo-Nazis too.
Never forget. Yeah. Okay, well, let's see. Let's go to, I believe we're going to Face the Nation now.
If you are focused on deterrence, why not do what Ukraine...
Hold on.
If you are focused on deterrence, why not do what Ukraine is asking you to do and sanction now? Take action now. Why keep it as a punitive matter after the fact?
Well, first, we are, as I said, taking action now. We built up across these many weeks a very strong coalition of countries that has made it very clear it will take very significant action if Russia commits renewed acts of aggression.
Right, and Ukraine is saying you could go harder. You could be stronger.
Go harder. Go harder.
Very significant military assistance to Ukraine.
This is how you're allowed to pretend that you're an adversarial journalist in the U.S. Corporate media, is if your stance, if your line of questioning is that the U.S. is not being hegemonic and crazy enough. That's how you can. It's such a beautiful system. That's how you can push back. It works so perfectly. Everyone gets to pretend as if they're,
holding people's feet to the fire.
Exactly. They're holding people accountable. They're being tough, but it's always insofar as they're trying to cajole U.S. leaders into being more aggressive and more hegemonic.
Yeah.
That's the only way. But it works perfect. It works because it looks on the surface. If you were to just look at that without knowing all the details, oh, she's holding him to account.
Yeah. Right. Wow. Yeah. She's not a sycophant. She's speaking truth to power. She's taking on the powerful. Yeah.
But really, it all boils down to the question of, are we sanctioning them yet? Are we sanctioning Russia yet?
Well, it's like we saw that with Biden and Afghanistan. It was like the one time that was like the gateway for them being critical of Biden.
Exactly right. Exactly right. When he decided to pull out, when he decided to, stand up to military leaders who were telling him to stay, that was, in the eyes of so many people in the U.S. media, an act of betrayal. And for a couple of, for a short moment, they cared about Afghans and their plight all of a sudden. Now, of course, Afghanistan parts of it are starving. The U.S. has held up billions of dollars in Afghanistan's money. It won't give it to them because the
people are
Taliban's in
starving
charge.
and freezing. Yeah,
and no one cares.
I gotta say, no mention. Sorry, keep going.
No mention on the Sunday shows. Nothing.
No, but you know who I gotta give a shout out to? Chris Hayes. He brought that up on his show. He did. He brought that up on his show.
Well, of course he did.
Chris is at
the outer yes, I know. Yeah. Chris was at the outer limits of like permissible dissent in corporate media. So occasionally we have to give thanks. Thank you, Chris, for having a minimal amount of humanity sometimes. Like when, I'm sure he also talks about the war on Yemen when no one else does. Of course, probably after he ignored it for a year.
But you know anyway, what? Constant reinforcement, baby steps. And thank you,
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris.
And thank you, Dark Arts by Adrian. Wish you had a daily show to translate all the constant BS, but you're doing an excellent job. Thank you. Well, so maybe we can work towards that.
Ukraine. We've been taking action against Russian agents in Ukraine. But as to the sanctions, the most important thing we can do is to use them as a deterrent, as a means of dissuading Russia from engaging in further aggression. Once sanctions are triggered, you lose the deterrent effect. So what we're doing is putting together a whole series of actions that would figure into President Putin's calculus.
Right, but I mean, even President Biden said at his press conference this week, he spent a lot of time trying to get NATO allies to actually be on the same page when it comes to anything short of invasion. I mean, it seems like Putin's easiest strategy would be to hit on that weakness. That's how you divide NATO allies. I mean, just yesterday, the head of the German Navy had to resign because of pro-Putin statements. This doesn't look like the alliance
pro-Putin statements. Oh my God,
is completely knit together here.
First
of all, she's giving advice to our enemies. She's telling them the weakness to strike at.
I've been very clear that
she's a traitor.
If there is any further Russian aggression in terms of sending Russian forces into Ukraine, there will be a swift, there will be a severe, and there will be a united response from the United States and Europe. Second, we've been equally clear that Russia engages in other tactics short of sending forces into Ukraine or other countries, hybrid actions, cyber attacks, efforts to bring a government down. And there, too, I'm very confident, based on the many consultations I've had with European allies and partners, that there will be a swift, calibrated, and also united response.
Swift. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. What are they going to do? They're not going to fight a war over Ukraine because they can't. Russia will win. So it's all just jargon.
Just sell some weapons. They'll just buy some weapons.
They'll just send some more weapons and talk tough, but they won't actually do anything. And the Ukrainian military is in a pretty rough shape. It's just they'll get creamed if there actually is a war. But I think luckily the thing is I don't think Russia actually wants a war. It's, who wants to launch a war on your border? It's not a fun thing to do, and it's costly, and it doesn't seem necessary if there are proposals on the table that are serious, that are just about basically preventing an outcome that by the way, the U.S. admits anyway that Ukraine's not going to join NATO. Part of the reason is it's too corrupt and has too many internal problems to even be able to join. So the outcome is one that the U.S. says will probably happen anyway, which is Ukraine not joining NATO. So Russia's request is simply to formalize that, have some kind of binding agreement towards that end. And even if the U.S. can't even agree to that, there is room in there to at least reach some kind of accommodation when it comes to not positioning weapons in Ukraine and other former Soviet states. And that's what should be being discussed on these shows. But again, that's not what's being discussed. It's about, can we sanction them enough? How tough can we look?
Yeah. Fandom is fun to tell people to rate and review the Useful Idiots podcast. You must beat PodSave. 150 number on top news show Apple charts. Easy to move up the ladder. Do it. Okay, everyone, rate and review the podcast. Even if you don't watch the podcast, listen to the podcast. Even if you're video people, But if you either way, just go in there and rate and review 5 stars, or else Pods Save America wins.
But don't write like Katie Halper told me to come. I actually haven't heard the show. I haven't heard the show. Katie told me to come here and rate it, but so I'm doing that. Don't write that.
Right. Don't write that. Yeah. All right. Oh, look at this. We got some mutiny, suggestion of mutiny encouragement. Loves your Monday morning show when Matt comes back. Aaron should stay on a permanent basis. Yeah.
No.
Let's do it.
That's what the Russians do, John. The Russians would win. Yeah, the Russians stay. The Russians stay. That's what the Russians do. We don't do that here.
They never leave. Yeah, we don't do that here. We're more like Ukrainian neo-Nazis. Okay, so next clip. Now we're going to see how different the Dems are from the Republicans.
Senator Ernst, I want your reaction to Secretary Blinken after what you just heard. Are you confident that the U.S. is doing what it needs to do to stop Russia from invading Ukraine?
Okay, this is Iowa Republican Senator Joni Ernst. Okay.
Dana, I believe that we need to act now. When it comes to pushing back against Russia, we need to show strength and not be in a position of doctrine of appeasement, which seems to be how President Biden has worked his administration. So we do need to go ahead and impose sanctions on Russia now. We need to show them that we mean business, and we will be there for Ukraine should they.
She sounds like a robot.
She does sound like a robot.
Invade. Once an invasion happens, lives are lost. You can't go back from that. So those sanctions need to be put in place now. They could be expelled from the SWIFT banking system. Certainly, we need to make sure that any defensive aid is in the hands of the Ukrainians, as well as.
So what that means, and this is a popular proposal in D.C. right now, is ejecting Russia from the SWIFT banking system. It means that, like, that Russians can't do debit card transactions. Right. They can't do purchases for, at the consumer level, like, we all make our purchases for groceries and stuff, but also just for borscht ingredients. Yes, thank you. Yes, but also they can't, they can't buy to do like a big commercial transaction, like to import like some food, for borscht, for example. Like they can't do that, and that's what these sadists in Washington want. It's and by the way, it's like, the irony is, like, the U.S. is supposed to love the free market, and that's what the U.S. is constantly defending. No one interferes in the free market more than the U.S. government, which has people openly advocating cutting off entire governments from the banking system, like this, by taking Russia off SWIFT, or this article I mentioned in the Washington Post today, where they're talking about banning from Russia the technology that goes into so many consumer electronics. Like, that's radical state interference in the economy. And the Post points out the last time the U.S. did that was to target the Chinese company Huawei, because Huawei was being successful, and the U.S. sanctions on Huawei basically hit the company's bottom line big time. So that's like radical government interference in the economy. That's like, I don't know what you want to call that. Like, I don't know if communists advocate such a level of state interference in the economy, but it's this like radical state totalitarianism, capitalism, where the U.S., because it just has power over the world, can interfere in economies everywhere to the point of cutting them off from the economy and the banking system if they want to. It's like that's some crazy that's the most anti-free market thing I can ever think of. Not that I personally care about free markets,
right, but
from the point of view of these people,
they're supposed to care about that. It's very they're cutting off that invisible hand that Adam Smith wrote so kindly about.
As much lethal aid as we can provide at this time. And then we need to ensure the safety and security of Americans that are in the Donbass region. They need to be moved out or know how to evacuate safely should Russia invade. But again,
who are the Americans in the Donbass region?
Specifically on sanctions.
Pause it for a second. Who are the Americans in the Donbass region? That's U.S. military trainers. There's hundreds of them who are there training the neo-Nazi infused Ukrainian armed forces. That's who she's talking about.
We must protect them.
Secretary Blinken tell me that if they impose sanctions now, it would take away a deterrent. Your response?
I think we have many options for deterrence when it comes to Russia, but we need to impose those now. President Putin only understands strength and power, And again, through a doctrine of appeasement, he has seen in other areas, whether it's Iran with this administration re-engaging Iran, even though they continue with bad behavior, whether it's working with China, whether it is the debacle that we saw in Afghanistan this last year. They see a very weak administration, and President Putin sees every opportunity to do what he wants to do in Ukraine with very little pushback from the United States. So we need to have firm resolve with this. We need to work with our NATO allies and make sure that an invasion does not happen.
How far should the United States go to defend Ukraine if Putin does invade? Should the Biden administration support a potential Ukrainian insurgency, as they are reportedly considering?
As we've done to such success in Afghanistan,
on
as we did to such success in Syria,
right?
Should maybe we get Al Qaeda to come from Afghanistan or Syria? Should they come to Ukraine and give them more weapons like we did in both
neo-Nazis.
places? Yeah.
Right.
Should we try to form an alliance between Al Qaeda and the neo-Nazis, or should
that would
they?
be good.
Yeah.
That would
should
be
they
a
fight
good
on two fronts? Should they fight together?
Yeah.
Should we use nuclear weapons? I mean, why not?
All options must be on the table.
On the table. And again, Dana, let's
Dana,
let's pray that an invasion doesn't happen. And again, we have to be very strong to make sure that Russia is not able to go into a sovereign nation without pushback. So let's get those sanctions in place. Let's make sure the Ukrainian military is prepared to respond. But we should be there for Ukraine. We have a number of agreements, whether it's the Budapest Agreement, the Minsk Agreement with Russia. We need to make sure that those agreements are being followed. They're not just pieces of paper. They have kept Europe safe. They have kept Americans safe. So let's do what we can now to prevent any invasion.
Right, and of course, I hear you on that.
The Minsk Agreement that she mentioned, that is a good idea to follow the Minsk Agreement. The parties violating that right now, the main party is the Ukrainian government with the support of the U.S. because Minsk, and this is the accord to basically end the war in the Donbass region of Ukraine, it calls for some autonomy for the Donbass region. And Ukraine is refusing to implement that, even though it agreed to it.
Right.
And the main reason why it's refusing to agree to that is, I think, because of the U.S. Because basically, if you give the Donbass autonomy and some form of self-government, then basically they have a veto over Ukraine joining NATO. They can reject that decision, then it won't be possible because they're a part of Ukraine and they have autonomous powers and they have the right to weigh in on these decisions. So Ukraine's refused to implement that, and there's no way that Ukraine will be doing that if they didn't have the backing, and I would say even they didn't have the U.S. ordering them to ignore Minsk. So what she's calling for, in principle, follow the Minsk Accord, is a good idea.
Right.
It's the U.S. that's actually not violating that. Yeah.
But how much should the U.S. contribute American men and women to doing what you're describing?
Well, again, let's make sure, one, it doesn't happen. But secondly, again, there are so many tools in our toolbox that we need to be using diplomacy where we can. But also, if there are ways that we can share intelligence, work with our NATO allies and other partners, we certainly can provide the resources necessary to bolster the Ukrainian military. It is very important that Americans understand that when we have a stable Europe, when we have democracy around the globe, it makes our country safer. This matters. Russia invading Ukraine matters to Americans, not only for the safety and security of our partners in Europe, but also for the safety and security of Americans right here at home.
Some foreign policy experts believe
there is actually a tie.
Vladimir Putin sees is an opening.
There is actually a tie to U.S. safety and security when it comes to Ukraine, but in the opposite way that she's describing, because there are cases, and this has been documented now, of far-right neo-Nazis going over to Ukraine to join the insurgency that these people fantasize about arming even more, and then coming back. And someone was even arrested a few years ago on a pretty serious charge for here in the U.S. on after going over and fighting in Ukraine, and they were basically a neo-Nazi. So that is the way in which the Ukraine crisis actually affects U.S. safety and making the U.S. an even more dangerous place with its Nazis and and far-right militias.
Right.
Because in part of how deeply divided America is right now. You're a Republican senator. What is your message to Vladimir Putin on that?
Don't do it. Don't do it. That is my message to President Putin.
But what's
He
your
needs to
message about
understand
the
that,
partisanship here and whether or not that makes America more weak?
Well, I would say that we do have differences on policy, and that is obvious to everyone. But let's make this very clear, that as Americans, as Democrats, Republicans, and independents, we want to see a free and prosperous Ukraine. So President Putin, don't do it. On this, we are allied.
All right. Can I just play another clip just so we get a sense of where Joni Ernst is as a moral, ethical figure? In case people missed this, this is from a few years ago when she was running for Senate and actually won, which is inconceivable to me. But Wilson, can we play that clip?
And let me just mention quickly what I was talking about. So I'll tweet this out, but there's an article in the Gray Zone from 2019 by Ben Norton, where Ben talks about a far-right soldier in the U.S. military being arrested by the FBI for plotting bomb attacks targeting U.S. media outlets and Democratic politicians. While serving in the U.S. military, this right-wing extremist gave fascist militants in Ukraine and other countries information on how to build bombs, including what he called cell phone IEDs in the style of the Afghans. The FBI said he also planned to travel to Ukraine to join the Azov battalion, a neo-Nazi militia that has for years been directly supported by the U.S. government. So that's what I'm talking about. That's the connection, the actual connection, if we cared about safety in the U.S. and we cared about the safety of Ukraine, between Ukraine and the U.S.
So ridiculous. Okay. Wilson, we got that other clip.
A candidate hoping to fill retiring Senator Tom Harkin's seat is making some waves with a new campaign ad.
I'm Joni Ernst. I grew up castrating hogs on an Iowa farm.
Okay, I grew up, this is an ad for her. I grew up castrating hogs on an Iowa farm.
So when I get to Washington, I'll know how to cut pork.
Republican Joni Ernst says Washington needs to start living within its means. Ernst says she'll get lawmakers to cut wasteful spending, balance the budget, and repeal.
Look at those fucking pigs. First of all, okay, to be fair, oh my God. Look, one has its arm over the other one. It's so cute. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
The black arm is over the pink one. And I'm biased because I don't eat pork or I don't eat any red meat, but I don't eat pork because when I was like 11, I stopped eating it because I thought pigs were so cute, and I still think they're so cute. But even if I were not a pig fan, those are there. I can admit there are ugly pigs. Those aren't ugly pigs. Those are cute, adorable pigs.
So you're saying it's some real sickos who made this ad?
Yeah, it's a real fucking sicko.
They're choosing to celebrate that they kill cute pigs.
Yeah. Look at that little arm.
That's true.
And she ends this ad with another play on
They have
pig.
more humanity than she does, those pigs.
Washington's full of big spenders. Let's make them squeal.
And then
Ernst
she says
is one of 5 Republicans looking.
She's the fucking worst. She's a sadist.
Yes.
She's a sadist.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you can't make it up. That's a commercial that she made for herself. I just can't.
These people shouldn't be allowed around animals, let alone human beings.
Yeah. Amen to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't have time. It's okay. We focused today was big Russia-Ukraine day, right? We don't have time to get to other clips, but I think that's okay. These are the ones that mostly needed our analysis, our breakdown.
We possibly avoided war, Katie. We
did, yeah.
Averted a Russian invasion of Ukraine just by bringing people the cold hard facts.
Yep.
Yeah.
That they can't blink away from. Yeah. Well, at least she didn't suggest castrating Putin.
Good for her. That's right.
She showed a lot of self-restraint. Yeah.
She'll probably do that next week. She'll probably kick herself for not proposing that this week.
Yeah, right.
She'll come back.
Yeah. She'll fix that error, that oversight. Yeah. Well, guys, if you are tuning into this, thank you so much. Make sure you subscribe to Substack so you get our exclusive Substack only content, which we release every week. Also, I should have said this at the beginning of we'll say this next week, but if you want to hear this on audio, you can also, it's another plus of being Substack only subscribers. Also, you get to hear our show without the ads. I'm about to sneeze. Sorry about that. Morning allergies, guys. That's all it is. Anything else? It'll be a great show this week too.
Of course it will.
Yeah.
Someone asked me about where to get coffee in Vancouver.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. That's a great question. I'm partial to Kits because that's where I went to high school. But I'd love to know, and I'd love to hear your opinion about where's the best place to go.
There's a coffee shop in I think there's like a chain. I went to one of them in Vancouver. It's like independent, but has more than one. Maybe I'm wrong.
Oh, JJ Bean.
Yeah, that's a cute
good.
one. Yeah,
it is good.
Yeah.
Of course, Anthony says Tim Horton, a Canadian favorite. Yes. What's the word on Assad joining the podcast? I mean, yeah, we're working.
We can't
on that.
reveal our talk. So
yeah, we're working on that.
We can't tell you.
Yeah.
It's in motion. Yeah. Assad hater. We could get Assad hater on. I can make that happen.
You can't get Assad. Yes.
Yeah, we'll get an Assadist for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. We will see you next week. Thanks so much. Thanks, Wilson. Thanks all of you for tuning in.
Bye, everybody.